So there was a time when I was very much obsessed with all things digital, and these cameras here are basically a product of that. These are vlogging cameras that I have owned over the past, starting from the oldest one here, which is this JVC Averio camcorder. Familiar form factor for those of us that come from a certain generation. This one here is a more upgraded version of a consumer camcorder back then. This is the Canon HG10 and it's shot in this very interesting format, which is the AVC HD format. And this one here is the GoPro Hero 3. This was, when it came out, it was all the rage because it could shoot in 4K 15 frames per second or even in 2K 30 frames per second. And this one here is my latest acquisition. This is the DJI Osmo Pocket 3. So you can see these 4 generations of vlogging cameras right in front of me. Now I'm going to rate them based on 2 simple criteria. One is a form factor, and the next one would be the video quality. Let's start with the video quality because obviously this one would be the clear winner. It can shoot 4K, I believe it's 30 frames per second, and it's just very excellent when it comes to the video quality. Very versatile, has a ton of features. Second to that would be this camera here. This is an action camera, but some of us used it for vlogging. You can see this typical setup here would be one that I would use for vlogging because I could just carry this around and capture shots, right? And video quality wise, it could shoot 4K, albeit at only 15 frames per second, but it was a very decent camera in terms of the image quality. It had a certain look to it because it was quite wide angle, so it was almost like it had that spherical look to the image. There were software that you could use to correct that wide angle look. Now, third here would be this one here. This one could shoot 1080p, and I find that the bit rate, even though it's 1080p, it's not as good looking as a 1080p shot with a camera like this because it's different bit depth. So the 1080p on this camera is not the same as a 1080p on a more modern equivalent here with a bigger sensor. So yeah, but I would say this one would be the third in line, and obviously this one would shoot SD quality. It had several modes. One of them was the ultra fine mode, and that would just shoot SD quality. You know, if you're looking for something more vintage or retro looking, you could use a camera like that to simulate that time period, the early 2000s. So let's talk about the second criteria, which is the form factor. Now, when it comes to the form factor, this is where these 2 cameras shine over those 2 over there, because the form factor of this meant that it was so ergonomic. It fits right into your palm. It just fits naturally, and these controls were simply all within reach. One hand operation, and the screen would flip and it would also articulate this way, so you could turn this camera around this way and do selfie videos. This was ideal for vlogging back in the day. If you were interested in vlogging in the early days of YouTube, this is a camera that you could just set up and you would have a ton of fun. And when you flip this screen around, the image also flips just like that. These cameras, these camcorders were simply convenient, and you wouldn't be a parent in the early 2000s if you didn't own a a camera like this. This was very, very popular, this form factor. And I find that it is a much easier form factor to shoot with. So easy, so portable. Now these more modern cameras, the action type cameras, GoPro still makes a bunch of these, and even DJI also has an action camera that looks similar to this. And this one here, I find that they're not as great when it comes to the form factor. Don't get me wrong, this thing is small, it fits in the hand, it's easy to work with, but I would be so afraid to take a tumble with something like this because I feel like this whole lens is gonna detach from the body. And not just that, I find that for me with big hands, holding something so small is actually more work to actually grab this and not put a whole bunch of smudges on the screen here if I'm trying to avoid the screen, right? And also if I want to hold it this way, it's awkward. It's awkward. I cannot resist putting my hand over here. It actually feels like more work trying to hold this thing in my hand than holding this one here. This one fits so good that I could it's effortless. It's effortless, right? So the form factor of this is way better. And another thing that these two cameras have, which these don't have, is zoom. The power of the optical zoom. These cameras were solid when it comes to optical zoom. For example, this little measly camera here had 34 times optical zoom. That is a massive range for just a tiny little camera like this. 34 times optical zoom. That's something that these cameras couldn't even dream of right now. So even though the image quality is top notch on these two here, especially this one here, optical zoom by far. Another thing that these two cameras have, which I would say is pretty much on par with the more modern cameras like this one especially, is the autofocus. Even though these cameras these camcorders are old, they were renowned for having very, very effective and sensitive autofocus, or more responsive autofocus. For example, this camera here, I'm just gonna zoom into something like that. Now, notice how it focuses on that railing over there. If I am to just put my hand right in front of it, just as quickly it focuses on my hand. That is incredible. That is simply incredible. It was smooth, it was seamless. So yeah, each of these cameras from different generations have their strengths and weaknesses.